On Thursday the 9th of December in 2021, a 25-year-old accountant named Taylour Young was supposed to be out running errands on his lunch break when he would mysteriously disappear. His final text message would apparently be to his girlfriend, so when he didn't return home later that evening after failing to respond to any of her calls, she became extremely concerned that something may have happened. So, given the circumstances, she headed over to his mother's house to ask if she had heard from Taylour, but strangely, she too had not spoken to the young man since around 11:30 AM that day. At this point, the two then tracked Taylour's last known whereabouts using the Find My iPhone app, and they were directed to a Capital One bank in Houston, where they spotted Taylour's cell phone placed in a bush next to the Drive-Thru ATM. Taylour was then reported missing shortly after to the Houston Police Department. However, there would be no real updates to the case until over 2 months later, where Taylour's decomposing remains were eventually discovered in the trunk of his very own car. So, as you can imagine, this discovery was a huge shock to the family, and the story immediately caught fire across the community, with many wondering who was responsible. But after 2 years of investigating, the suspect behind Taylour's unfortunate passing is still unknown to this day, which has understandably led many to wonder. Could Taylour have simply fallen victim to a fatal robbery? Or could the guilty suspect be a little closer to home? Taylour Young was born in the year 1996 to his loving mother Tiffany Robinson in the city of New Orleans, Louisiana. Little was known about his younger years, but what we do know is that at the age of 9, he was unfortunately forced to relocate with his mother to Houston, Texas, due to the devastating impacts of Hurricane Katrina in 2005. But despite this rather tumultuous upbringing, Taylour's childhood was still filled with love and happiness, with the young man eventually developing into an incredibly well-adjusted adult, to say the least, who always managed to have a smile on his face. His mother would describe him as a humble, friendly, active person who had an intense passion for skateboarding. But alongside his hobbies, Taylour was also a very driven individual when it came to his education, as by all accounts, he was a straight-A student who would never fail to impress his teachers. So with this in mind, it was no surprise when Taylour would be accepted into Sam Houston State University, where he would study finance with the ultimate goal of one day becoming a full-time accountant. And in typical form, it wasn't long before he successfully graduated with his sights firmly set on a job working as a junior accountant for Valoric Oil and Gas. During his time here, co-workers would describe him as one of the highest performers in the company, quickly rising the ranks and proving himself to be a valuable asset to the team. However, it would unfortunately be during one of these workdays that Taylour would decide to run some errands during his lunch break, a decision that would later prove to be fatal, as after leaving the office, he was never seen again. On Thursday the 9th of December, the 25-year-old man was sitting at his desk at work when he would send a text to his mother sharing a cute image of his beloved dog Gigi at around 11:30 AM. But as it was quickly approaching lunchtime, it wasn't long before Taylour eventually logged out of his computer, as he had made plans to run a few errands during his lunch break that day. He then walked out of the Valoric Oil and Gas office, which was located in downtown Houston, and climbed into his silver Honda Civic with the aim of returning back within the hour. At this point, it is unknown where Taylour was supposed to be heading, but at around 12 PM he was captured on the surveillance camera of a Kroger's as he entered the drive-thru of a Capital One bank located just off the side of South Voss Road. According to reports, Taylour did not exit the vehicle and was not captured ever winding down the window to use the ATM. However, it must be said that the Kroger's was positioned around 160 yards away from the bank, meaning the footage was very difficult to see and therefore difficult to say for certain what Taylour did whilst in the drive-thru. But either way, it would appear that he would eventually decide to drive off without withdrawing any cash, and immediately fled the scene at a relatively normal speed. However, after he failed to return back to the office later that afternoon, his colleagues began to get concerned. Text messages were sent, but they would receive no response, which was an experience also felt by Taylour's girlfriend, who was even more concerned when he failed to return home later that evening. So, worried for her boyfriend's safety, She then headed over to his mother's house to ask her if she had heard from Taylour, but to her shock, Tiffany Robinson would reveal that the last time she spoke to her son was at 11:30 AM that morning, and that she too had no idea where he could be. Taylor's girlfriend then brought up the Find My iPhone app to see if she could track down Taylor's last known whereabouts, and after a quick search, she discovered that his phone had last pinged near Voss Road, so the two of them then set off together to check the area. Once they arrived on the scene at around 7:30 PM, they were then led to the Capital One Drive-Thru bank, where they didn't notice anything suspicious at first, but after a few minutes of searching, Taylor's girlfriend proposed the idea of checking in the bushes outside the bank near the ATM machine, and so Tiffany then bent down to check, and upon moving the shrubbery aside, she noticed the outline of a cell phone. Taylor's girlfriend then immediately identified the phone as belonging to Taylour, and collectively, the two women were instantaneously overcome with emotion, as they realised in that harrowing moment that not only was their loved one missing, but there was also no way they could contact him, leaving them with no choice but to officially report Taylour Young as missing. On Friday the 10th of December, the Houston Police Department would respond to a call they had received the previous day around a missing 25-year-old accountant that had strangely disappeared during his lunch break. According to the Public Information Officer Kessie Smith, they then checked with the local businesses surrounding the area where Taylor's cell phone was found and asked them to share their surveillance footage from the day. This was where they first officially discovered that Taylour had entered the Capital One Drive-Thru as he was captured on the security camera of a Kroger's on the other side of the business park. However, it was not revealed at that time what was found on Capital One's surveillance cameras, which would have more than likely provided a great deal of help in uncovering the truth of that day. But for whatever reason, the footage was never released, and no statements were ever made to the public about whether or not Taylour had used the ATM or if he was even driving the car at the time. But as far as the family were concerned, Taylour had stopped off at a bank he was not registered to as far as they were aware, and therefore his decision to enter the drive-thru that day was incredibly suspicious in their opinion. So with this in mind, Taylor's girlfriend then attempted to access his banking information to see if she could confirm if he had withdrawn any money that day, and according to her mother, who was later interviewed during a live stream, Taylor's girlfriend was somehow able to locate the correct password. But upon viewing Taylor's transaction history, she was terrified to see that he had withdrawn two different sets of $1,000 from separate banks, implying that he had randomly decided to clean out his bank account for no apparent reason. However, it was not confirmed if the bank he had used was in fact Capital One, and so the family were left with a feeling of despair as they weighed up the reality of the situation. Either Taylour had decided to leave his life behind despite recently moving out into his own home and adopting a dog, or he had been forced to withdraw that money, and therefore his life was more than likely in grave danger. On Wednesday the 15th of December, a local news outlet known as Click 2 Houston would decide to pick up Taylor's story and spread awareness of his situation to the public, in the hopes that by sharing his image, this would lead to a potential sighting of the young man. According to the report, Taylor's mother, Tiffany Robinson, would explain that for the past few days since his disappearance, everyone had been looking for him and they just wanted Taylour to come home safely. Tiffany also revealed that she had spoken to the Houston Police Department the day before and that they had now reviewed the surveillance video from the Capital One bank but strangely found no signs of foul play. So given the lack of leads in the case, Taylor's family and friends then joined forces to search for their loved one, using the hashtag #BringTaylorHome on social media, as well as conducting several group searches around the area that Taylour was last seen at, handing out flyers and speaking to locals. However, despite their huge efforts, weeks would soon go by with the family still struggling to find any explanation for his sudden disappearance. There were a few unofficial leads which were being spoken about behind the scenes, that a potential friend of Taylor's could have been responsible, but these claims were never backed up with any hard evidence, meaning the police couldn't take them very seriously. Also, the case was somewhat tarnished by scam artists who would attempt to extort money from Tiffany Robinson in exchange for information about Taylour. According to her, she even received a call from a person who was asking for a ransom of $20,000 for her son, but as assumed, this ended up being nothing more than a hoax. So as the days went by, with the police continuing to have no luck in locating the missing young man, Taylor's family began to lose hope that they would ever see their loved one again. And as the year would come to a close, the community came together and prayed that a resolution to this tragic story would soon arrive in the new year, with hopes of Taylour returning home to his family once again. However, although these prayers of closure would eventually be answered, they would soon find out that this story would not have a happy ending. On Monday the 10th of January, an unknown Dallas-based towing company would receive a call from a business park located on Mockingbird Lane, as apparently there had been a vehicle parked there for a number of days that appeared to have been abandoned. The car in question was a 2019 silver Honda Civic, but as the call was only made to a privately owned towing company, they didn't feel the need to run the license plate of the vehicle and instead just took it away to their nearby impound lot as per usual. The car then sat there for a total of 9 days without drawing too much suspicion, as it was relatively common at the time for people to leave their vehicle in business parks as a means of free parking. In fact, abandoned vehicles can sometimes be left for up to 6 months on industrial estates and business car parks before any action is ever taken, which is apparently due to a lack of understanding when it comes to what you should actually do in the event of an abandoned vehicle. However, in the case of Taylour Young, it is unknown how long his vehicle was left in the business park, and therefore we do not know the exact date it was abandoned. But either way, one thing we do know is that around 9 days after being towed away, a disturbing discovery was made by a worker at the impound lot who reported a strange smell coming from the trunk of a Honda Civic to the Dallas Police Department. They then arrived on the scene shortly after, and officers pried open the trunk of the vehicle, determined to get to the bottom of this mystery. But what they found would send shockwaves throughout the community, as they would stumble upon the decomposing remains of Taylour Young. Now, unfortunately, as far as the official investigation goes, this is all we know for now, as the police have been unable to name any suspects or even provide a cause of death in the time since. But despite this lack of leads, Taylor's family and friends are continuing their efforts to raise awareness for the case, as until a suspect has been charged and imprisoned for his murder, we have to keep fighting for justice. However, with Taylor's case now being over 2 years old, alongside the incredibly suspicious circumstances that surround his death, the likelihood of his family getting closure is only growing weaker as the time passes. So with that, let's get into some of the potential theories. Now, to kick things off, I think the best place to start here would be to consider the possibility that Taylour could have been the victim of a robbery gone wrong. Firstly, we do not know who was driving the car that day at the Drive-Thru bank, because as far as I can tell, there was never a confirmation revealed by the police other than the fact that it appeared there was no foul play involved from what they saw in the surveillance footage. But even if Taylour was in the driver's seat, that doesn't mean that there couldn't have been a potential suspect in the backseat threatening him to do as he was told. There is no hard evidence for this, but seeing as Taylour would go on to take $2,000 out of his bank account would seem to point in the direction of foul play. The limit on his debit card was apparently $1,000, so it would make sense that a suspect would force Taylour to drive to multiple banks to conduct several cash withdrawals. However, if this was the case, why would his body have ended up in the trunk of his very own car? Well, it is very possible that the culprit may have been paranoid that if they let Taylour go after the robbery, he would be able to identify them and therefore send them to prison. So in an attempt to get away with the crime, they could have chosen to take his life. From there, they could have easily dumped his body in the trunk and left the car abandoned in a random location that would not link back to them. But if this is in fact what happened, who could have been responsible? Well, it could have been a random thief in the area that just happened to choose Taylour by coincidence. Or perhaps it was somebody who knew him and therefore was aware of how good Taylour was at saving money. Either option is possible, but if we spend a moment to consider the former, Houston is certainly no stranger to robberies, with an average of over 5,000 of them taking place per year in certain areas. So using statistics alone, It wouldn't surprise me if this horrific story really was just the result of bad luck. But if for argument's sake, we say that the robbery wasn't conducted by a random person on the street, could it be possible that the suspect behind Taylour's tragic death could actually be a little closer to home? Now, just before I get into this theory, let me quickly preface by saying I have no hard evidence to back it up, but there is certainly a lot of hearsay that I feel needs to be discussed in conjunction with this case. So firstly, Taylour's girlfriend at the time appears to have since deleted all of her social media profiles, meaning I was unable to find her name or any of her involvement during the time of the investigation. Also, the claims that were made through her mother do not seem to be backed up by the police, as they have not revealed anything to the public that would suggest Taylour had withdrawn any money that day at all, so all we've really got to go off here is her word. In addition, there were also details provided by the girlfriend's mother which seemed to conflict with the story provided by Taylour's mother, Tiffany Robinson, as according to her, she really didn't know too much about this girlfriend, despite the fact that this couple apparently knew each other since high school and were supposedly part of the same band. Just as a quick side note, if you would like to hear the full interview of the girlfriend's mother on the Grey Hughes Investigates channel, I highly recommend you check out the video on screen now, as her behaviour is seriously suspicious to say the least, and she makes several contradicting statements. I'll leave a link to this video in the description below. However, saying this, it is certainly possible that Taylour just never mentioned certain aspects of his personal life to his mother, and that he could have dated multiple girls that she wasn't aware of. But seeing how close their relationship was, being that he was her only child, it would be strange to think he was dating a girl that his mother knew very little about. It would also seem that Tiffany had an inclination that this girlfriend could have been involved, as well as a few of her friends. So given how close she was to the case, I believe this is a theory we have to keep in mind. But before I get too carried away here, the last thing I want is to have to take this video down due to any offence caused to the people mentioned. So I think it would be for the best if I just end this theory here and let you guys continue the discussion in the comments. And following on from that, this would probably be a good time to apologise for my lack of uploads in the last few weeks, as I can't help but feel that the 2 points are somewhat related. As you may or may not know, I was forced to take down a video a few weeks back due to some concerning comments from people that were related to the case. I won't go into too much detail out of respect for the family, but to quickly provide some context, back in February I detailed the case of another man who disappeared under suspicious circumstances. But due to the fact that he had only been missing for a few days at the time, his family didn't appreciate me speculating on the situation and kindly asked me to take down the full 25-minute video in its entirety. Now, I completely understood where they were coming from, and with all of my videos, I am very conscious of being respectful to the family, so that means if they are uncomfortable with a video for whatever reason, I will always remove it upon their request. But this unfortunately means that if I am unable to get permission beforehand to cover a story, due to an inability to get in contact with them, it becomes extremely difficult to cover the case out of fear of causing any harm to the families. In fact, just last week I spent 5 days trying to get in touch with different families to ask if they would like me to spread awareness for their missing loved ones, but I didn't receive a single response. So I guess this is one explanation for why the videos have slowed down recently. But on top of this, I'm also very fearful now that if I spend too long on a video, like I have done in the past with some uploads being over 30 minutes long, all of that work will be squandered if I'm then forced to take it down, which is of course time I could have spent covering a different case. So with this in mind, going forward, this channel may unfortunately have to be restricted to just one video per week, as I simply don't have enough time to manage everything on my own. However, if I revert back to my old format of creating 10 to 15 minute videos every few days, this is one way I can keep the uploads coming relatively quickly. But before I make any concrete decisions, I would really like to know what you guys think, so please leave your comments on what you would like to see on this channel going forward. Anyway, with that, I think I'll leave this video here. But as always, if you have any theories of your own which you think may explain what happened to Taylour Young, please feel free to leave your ideas in the comments down below and I will do my best to get back to you. But until then, thank you so much for watching and for your continued support to this channel. And if you're not already, make sure to subscribe for updates on these stories. Also, check out the videos on screen now where I've covered a number of similar cases which you may be interested in. such as Jelani Day, who was another gifted young man of colour that mysteriously disappeared back in 2021, only to be found deceased near his abandoned car just over 1 month later.